Welcome back to the Fearless Females Voice podcast. On this episode, I am joined by Anjli from Anjli's Lookbook, who has a striving career and is also a popular blogger. I had been following Anjli for a while and loved her clothing and lifestyle content. At the start of 2021, I saw a video on her page titled Death, Depression, Divorce, which was a video summing up her 2020. I found this video to be very powerful as she opened up about topics which I haven't really seen many talk about, and her account was so real, raw, and honest. It all came from the heart. So I wanted to get her on the podcast to share her story, as I'm sure many other women have been through or are going through similar things. Anjli has had a great childhood being born and raised in Germany and then moved to England with her family. But as with life, there are always challenges and struggles. On this podcast, she talks to us about her upbringing in a traditional Asian family, her love for her culture and dancing, her experiences of her previous relationship, the divorce, and having anxiety and going through depression. From speaking to Anjli, I could feel her confidence, resilience, and strength, all of which she has been working on, and it was such a pleasure speaking to such a fearless female. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. Anjli, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and tell me, what does being a fearless female mean to you?
I think for me, a fearless female means owning who you are. So, and accepting who you are and not being afraid of that. So no matter whether you're a mum, a housewife, not married, traveling the world, comfortable at home, whatever it might be, is that you accept and are true to yourself and having no fear about being that person. So to me, that is a fearless female.
I love it. Applicable to all women, no matter what stages of your life you're in.
Definitely. As long as you're owning it, you're a fearless female. As long as you're not letting anybody in society dictate who and how you should behave, I think that is a fearless female, because that is you being fearless. You're not afraid of anything.
Yeah, I agree. And that's quite difficult to achieve as well and get to. So something that we all need to keep working on. So yeah, that's great.
No, I agree. And I don't think you can always be fearless every day and every minute of every day. But the core of what sits of who you are, and you do every action being true to who you are, I think that makes you fearless. So even if there's sometimes something you don't agree with, but you know you're doing it for the right intentions, for the right reasons, that's being fearless.
Yeah, great. I agree. Completely agree. So I've seen your journey on social media, and that's how I've kind of come across you, and I follow all your stuff and I absolutely love your content. But before we go into your lookbook page, how about we hear a bit more about you? So what do you do? Tell us a bit more about how you grew up and where you grew up.
In terms of my bringing up, I lived as part of a family of four. So there's my mom, my dad, and my sister. I was brought up in Germany. So I actually lived in Germany from the moment I was born. So from 1 month old until I was 9, because that's where my parents worked and were living. My sister is 4 years younger than I am. So she was also born and brought up in Germany. So yeah, we had a very, very different kind of bringing up. As my childhood spent a lot of time outdoors, always playing and that sort of stuff. So we were very much into like doing more nature things, hiking and things. And then life for me dramatically changed when my parents decided to move to England, which is where my mum is originally from. So at the age of 9, moved over to England, to a country I didn't speak the language of. So I didn't speak English. I had to learn English. I only spoke German and Punjabi.
Really? From up until the age of 9? So you didn't study that in school, English?
No. So in Germany, that's not a requirement until you hit secondary school. So I was the only Indian actually in the whole of my school in Germany as well.
What was that like?
It was, do you know what? People were like fascinated by it, because the only other ethnic minorities they saw was many Turkish people in Germany. Being Indian was actually very, very rare to them. So they were really sort of into it, because I remember when I was only 6, I did like a Bollywood performance for like a small talent play and had all like my German friends learn it, and they were super excited. So it was like really nice way of, they were just curious. They were curious about being Indian, and I was very much into my Bollywood, and because that's the only thing you could get over in Germany is like Bollywood films that have been shipped over via VHS, or if my mussy would send me anything, because they obviously were from England, so if they had any Bollywood stuff, they would send that like over. So for me, bringing up Bollywood was like the way and Bhangra music was the way I was connecting to being Indian, essentially, because then the rest of it was all very German. And when I moved to England, the only languages I spoke were Punjabi and German. Being stuffed in a school at 9, honestly, I didn't forgive my parents for years for that. I was really upset. Being made to wear school uniforms. I never wore school uniforms before. Like, they don't do that in Germany. And being in a school from 9 till 3, I was used to being in school from 8 till 1. You know, it's very, yeah, in Germany, you go to school from 8 till 1, you finish after lunch. It's a very different setup and life and everything else. But I know my parents did it because they felt like, you know, there's family around, there's a lot more Asians here, and education's very different. You don't go to university necessarily in Germany, like the progression that you do here in England. So yeah, I mean, that was like how I grew up. I was very much into my sports, so it was a bit different for me because there wasn't also many Indian girls that were into sports. So I was very physically involved. Like in Germany, I used to play on the football team and things like that, which girls didn't tend to do when I came to England. So it was a bit different. But yeah, secondary school was fine. I switched secondary schools, so made another big change. About a year into the secondary school I went to, my mum wasn't happy. So again, I broke away from all the people that I'd made friends with from when we moved here and all other things, to go to a school completely to the other side of town and make essentially new friends and meet new people, like all over again.
Gosh, sounds like you've been exposed to quite some change in your younger days.
And you would have thought it would have made me really resilient, but I don't think it did too much. But yeah, and apart from that, I just ended up going to university. I studied sports science at university.
Oh, did you? That's cool.
I did sports science at university and then went on to do my master's after that.
Did you play any football whilst you were studying?
No, unfortunately, no football. But on the secondary school, I was on the netball team. I was on the swimming team. I was on the badminton team. So it was a lot of sports based. Funnily, when you get to university, no one actually plays sports in sports science.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't do much sports when I was at university either, but I did when I was in school. So I think it's just something as you're growing up and as a kid, I guess you do more sports.
I think so. And I was always really heavily attached to like my Indian side, in the sense that I also started like an Indian dance club when I was in secondary school, and then I opened a public one when I started university, and I was also working. So my parents really instilled like this, you can do anything you kind of want to do. So if you want to run dance class and go to uni and have a part-time job, you can do it. So but it was a good bringing up, but it was also tough. I had a mum who went to university herself and was very modern and very young, and a dad that was very, very traditional, and balancing being brought up with two separate sides is actually very hard. So
were there any kind of conflicts there if they had a disagreement about something that you were doing?
Absolutely. I mean, my mum and dad were very, very different people. Absolutely. There was things, for example, my parents had no problem with me ever drinking, but my dad had a problem with me staying out late, for example, compared to other people. So there was always like kind of a tipping point here and there. So it was probably like every other female that's now in her 30s. We all lived double lives to a certain extent, what your parents would expect you to live when you're a teenager. You felt you wanted to live. And then I think every Asian female that is born in the 80s would have had that bringing up. I think for the 90s it may be a little bit different now, but for the 80s for sure.
And I really like that you've kept your roots as well, your Indian culture, your roots, your traditions. I love that, because you said you grew up in Germany and there weren't many Asian communities there, and yet you still learned Punjabi and German, which are your two key languages. So I really, really like that, because I do notice that as the generations go on, they are less and less connected to their culture and their traditions, no matter what that is. So if it's no matter where you're from or what roots you have, it's great that you have kept that.
It's really, language is really, really important to me. So I speak both Punjabi and Hindi fluently, and it is important to me. And I think a lot of that came down to the fact that my mom didn't speak German when she got married, and she spoke English. My dad didn't speak English but spoke German, and the only common language them two had in common was Punjabi. So essentially, as a child, that became like sort of our home language, and yeah, kind of managed to too. But I do think language is a strong connection to a lot of that. And I said, like, watching Bollywood movies, you just kind of, I've been watching them since about 3 or 4. So I think it comes a lot from that. And I've always been fascinated by like the fashion. And I was that kid that went to her German school, like in her pretty little like English dress and had banga on as well, and had like joined on her ankles, like anklets, like that's how I went to nursery.
I love that. I love that you're really proud of it as well, and you're able to just kind of go and own it, because it can be a bit daunting sometimes when you're in that environment where you are the kind of minority, let's say, and you actually embracing that and going in with your full outfit on, with your languages, with your bangles, your anklets, everything. That's great. That's really nice to hear.
I think that's also had a lot to do with the interactions from those like German teachers and stuff. Like they were really positive about that. I hear so many women's stories about that they found that really hard to own being busy, like when they were younger. And I suppose my German upbringing in that sense was a really positive one, because they were curious, they wanted to know, and you could own it. So in that sense, I think that's what allowed me to own it and be proud of it.
Love it. That's really good. Nice to hear. And I've seen some of your dance videos, actually. You posted them recently. You were great.
So I probably didn't mention, so I taught Bhangra for over 14 years, no, actually 12 years, performed on stage. So the Bhangra team was actually my own Bhangra team, and it was at one point the only all-female Bhangra team led by a female and owned by a female.
Wow.
That was my team essentially. And we performed, we never did weddings, and we didn't do private functions, because again, that was something my dad was very, very against. He never supported my dancing. So my mum was for it, my dad was very much against it. It was only in sort of the later years that he saw me competing on stages wearing a full salwar suit with a chunni on the head, that he was like, I see what she's doing, and it's proper folk gidda Bhangra like kind of dancing. But before that, my dad was not keen. He'd hammer me for it all the time. And even if I said I'm only teaching females, that's the only thing I do, that was a very tough time. But yeah, that was a very exciting part of my life. I performed in huge stages at Brit Asia Awards behind all sorts of different celebrities and artists, RDB, H. Dommy, like Gary Sandhu.
Wow, the old school. I know all of them.
Exactly. And that, you know, as a like 18, 19, 20-year-old, that's, you know, life. The biggest crowd we have performed over was 100,000, I think.
Wow.
It was amazing. So I absolutely loved having my own team of like female girls that would go on the stage and do essentially a dance form that was only ever reserved for males. So it was very good.
A bit of background on that. You said that your dad was against it almost at the beginning, and it was quite a tough time. Can you tell me about why that was and how you kind of overcame that, or how you changed his perceptions on what you were doing?
I think, again, for my dad, it was very difficult because he only had girls. There was members of his side of the family that actually shunned us for just being girls, and the fact that he only had girls. So I think a lot of that would have impacted his views on things like dancing. Dancing back then had a big stigma. I had girls that used to come to class and used to not tell their parents that they were at class, even though it was an all-female class.
Because I didn't know this about dancing.
Yeah, there was a big stigma because, you know, if you say dancing, people are going to assume you may be dancing, you know, not in appropriate clothing in front of people without actually knowing it. It could be that you're only going there as a social way to meet boys, for example. So my class was designed where women could come and feel free and dance and feel like it's a safe environment. They're not competing against boys. They're not going to get in trouble for liaising with them. It was meant to just be like a safe space. But yeah, my dad was just sort of always against it because it meant that we were out at functions, like at mellas, and we were out like a lot. Sometimes, you know, not coming home till 1 o'clock after I dropped all the dancers off, because being their captain, it was my responsibility to make sure all those girls got home safely. And I always wanted to ensure that safety, like there was no tomorrow. But my dad would be upset if that means breaking curfew, or every weekend I come home, I'm always running around. He was like, you run from one thing to another, you're dancing in front of people that we don't know, what if somebody sees you? Like, he didn't like me doing music videos. I've only ever done a couple, because back then as well, the British Asian scene was just coming up. If you think about music, like Brit Asia and things like that. I still remember the first time my dad saw me in Brit Asia and he was like, oh, is that you? And I was like, no, I don't know what you're on about.
Oh gosh.
But yeah, I think the reason I got past it and got through to my dad eventually is because I knew I'm not doing anything wrong. We are dressed well, we are well behaved, we don't do and go to functions that I don't think we were sent. That's why we don't do weddings, we don't do birthday parties, we don't do private functions, we do big open things. But again, you know, my dad was also a taxi driver. He was only surrounded with people that had that mentality. So for him to say, I had to really say to my dad, and I think that's the point he's got to now, and he's very good with it now, but it took some time. I was like, if you don't have a problem, nobody else ever will. If somebody said, I saw your daughter like doing gidda in a suit, you turn around and say, yeah, because she knows her Punjabi, she knows her culture, and she does it really well. And what? I was like, Dad, you have to own that, because that if you don't own it, nobody else ever will. They'll only come to you telling you stories, and we always think, like parents always think they have to sit there feeling ashamed. But I was like, why? I was like, I teach girls, we're dressed well, I'm teaching them the art form of Bhangra. I know what a Jummer is, I know what the beat is called, I know, like I've studied it to understand it. I was like, so it's not that we're just getting together and jumping up and down. I was like, we are being creative, we are learning about culture. You do certain moves to certain beats of certain songs that are fitting in for certain things, because that's you know, there's moves that replicate the Punjab like grass called fusla. You know, you learn all this thing that comes behind it. That's part of our culture, Dad. It took him a long time. Like I said, it's not just me on stage actually competing. He was the guy in the crowd shouting the loudest after that.
Oh, amazing. It's good that you turned him around and actually he could see that all the benefits from it. That's great. And do you still do this now?
So yeah, unfortunately, so when I got married, because I moved quite far away from where I'd originally set it up, I didn't want to leave the girls without anything and take that away. So I just taught via my co-captain. I used to do the virtual choreography, send it to her, and she'd teach it on. But as all of the girls sort of got married off, like all the seniors that I had trained, there was nobody else to run the classes anymore. So unfortunately, I've had to close them, and due to the nature of my job, it's also not been possible to reopen them, because I have a job where I don't have set hours. So it's quite difficult. So, but it's not to say that it's not still in the pipeline, and I'd like to go back to teaching it at some point. And I'm always the first one on the dance floor and the last one to leave. So
love it.
Changed.
The how do you say, the life of the party? That's it. The life of the party.
Yeah, and that's again, I had to make my dad realize. I was like, look, I'm always the first one up, last one out. I was like, you know, it's in me. My mom always said the girl danced before she could walk. She was like, she couldn't walk straight for 2 years, definitely bouncing up and down. So that had a lot, you know, a lot to do with it as well.
It sounds like something you should continue on. It sounds like you're really passionate about it. Something that you can pick up again, I'm sure.
Possibly.
Anyone listening to this who's interested, you know who to contact.
I did run Bhangra classes on my Instagram live for the first, like, I think it was the first 2 months of like lockdown, like last year. But due to me supporting like the NHS with my job, I was becoming exhausted, and I had to take a step back and be like, this is quite exhausting, like it's tiring. Like that's another reason I stepped away from the Bhangra scene, is because I was doing everything from designing the costumes to choreographing to formations to recruiting to teaching and then performing myself. It was too much. But now I feel I'm in a place where I know what I can do and I know what I can't do, and I just need to accept that, and then I can maybe be able to do it again.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as you were speaking, you touched a bit on your marriage, that you were married. And recently I saw a video of yours which pretty much summarized your 2020. And the name of this video was Depression, Death. Yes. And I found this video to be really, really, really powerful. When I watched it, I wasn't expecting that at all. I've been following all your things, so I know kind of the kind of content you put out. And when I saw this video, I was like, what can that be about? Like, I saw the title and I was thinking, I didn't expect that it would be so kind of in-depth, so free talking, and you were just so kind of honest with everything. And it was so powerful. I listened to every word and it really got to me. I was just like, wow, she is strong, she's resilient, and yeah, it's just she's just confident, she's fearless. And it really inspired me watching that video. How did you feel when you were filming it, or what made you film that video?
So there was a couple of reasons. Like you're sort of saying, it's so nice to hear, like your reactions to that video. Honestly, it means a lot. I don't always feel that way. I don't always feel strong, and I don't always feel resilient, and I don't always feel confident. And I know that's often a perception that comes across when you're an Instagrammer or an influencer. And so there was a couple of reasons for doing that video. One was selfishly for myself, that if I put it out there, it solidifies what I've been through 2020 and gives me a chance to accept that. Saying things out loud often helps your mind understand as well. And as much as I've been lucky that I've got very good friends and family that I've spoken to out loud, to me, my Instagram page is about being honest. It's about being real. And it's about having built a really nice community around me. So sometimes saying that aloud as well. Plus, the other thought was, if I'm going through this and I've had a really tough year, there must be plenty of others that have too. And if somebody doesn't take the first step to have that conversation, whether it's they do it on an open platform or whether they turn to their friend next time around and say, look, this is what I'm going through, someone's got to start a conversation somewhere, all right? And it was just a case of thinking, it's a new year. Let's see what 2020 actually meant and how you can turn that around to be different, or you can view it differently, change the mindset, change the words. So that's why death, depression, and divorce turn into resilience, growth, and gratitude, essentially, because you need to change those words around. So the way I was feeling when I was doing the video, I think I had a bit of a power surge moment. I think I just woke up that day and was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. And I just kind of jumped on the bandwagon and was just like, I'm going to sit there. I'm going to take that video. And I wanted it to be with no edits. I wanted it to be purely spoken from the heart and not something I have to watch over again and edit. I wanted it to come naturally. I wrote loads of notes on, which I looked at it for the first 5 minutes, and after that I didn't look again, and it just kind of all washed out of me. And there was a sense of relief as well, and release. So there was a bit of both of those kind of feelings. Plus, people are always saying, "And you're so organized, you're always so bubbly, you're always so confident." Like, and a part of that is true, but you have to remember there's also a human being sometimes behind that's going through things too. So just as a reminder, you just don't know what people go through in their lives.
And some of the things that you touched upon, not many people talk about them enough, and they bottle them up. So that's why when I did listen to it, it was even that extra bit powerful. It's clear that it wasn't edited. It just came from the heart. And honestly, watching it, I was just like taken away with, wow, I just felt almost like impressed as well. I was like, she's doing something so big, something that not many or hardly anyone else does. And it's just speaking the truth about your experiences. If we can touch on some of those points. So I know there was one around divorce. Mm-hmm. So divorce is something that's quite common, I'd say. There's I know quite a few people who have gone through a divorce or are going through a divorce. And yet it's a topic which isn't spoken about enough, because I feel there's some kind of perception of negativity around it, or kind of a stigma about talking. Exactly.
Yeah. Stigma. It's seen, especially I think in our Desi culture, or I should say Asian culture. Yes. I mean, one thing I will say is after I put that video out, my inbox was flooded. I had over 450 messages, and I would say over half of those were from other women that were either contemplating divorce, had already been divorced, or had some sort of experience with it.
Wow.
It makes you realize that how common it is, but it also makes you realize how common the stigma is and how silenced women get over it. Like they get asked to be silenced about it, as if it's something to be ashamed of. I think, and what makes it worse is, regardless of what's happened in that marriage, when you're going through divorce, as a person, you will always feel a sense of failure. That feeling will always exist. And then unfortunately what the Asian community does is it draws on that and it makes that even worse. Something must have happened, something must have happened for this to occur. Everybody always wants to know why it occurred. Nobody actually cares about the fact that it occurred, that a divorce actually happened. Everyone just wants to know why. And again, I think that's down to a lot of Asian community. If people just stopped asking why and just asked, are you okay? People will probably talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, I completely agree. There is a lot of kind of negativity and perception around this topic, and especially in the Asian community, as you said. But many women are going through something very similar to that, or many women are in relationships that they're not happy in themselves and that they're struggling with, whether it could be anything from being abused or just not in love anymore, or whatever the case is. It doesn't really matter. But there's always that, do I stay or do I go? And even just to take the first step in realizing that this isn't right for me, I'm not happy, regardless of if you're in a relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, married. The key is to get out when you know that. Or what advice would you give for someone who's in that, to say this isn't right and it's time to go?
And again, I think it comes down, so there's several reasons, and without going into like the details of it, I think for me it's not just I'm not happy. If I'm not happy, I can't make the other person happy either. You can only fill somebody else's cup if your cup isn't empty. Do you see what I mean? You can only be present, you can only be happy if that is already something within you. And I started to realize that I'm not myself. Like, I'm quite a smiley, bubbly person, and I started to realize that I'm not that person that much anymore. Comments were made that you don't smile as much as you used to, or you're not. I used to get angry a lot more. I used to get angry at really small things. It's actually funny, I was having a conversation with my mum the other day, and she was like, you're so much calmer. She was like, you're not just getting angry at like small little things. Things used to agitate me constantly. And that's where I figured out that can't be right. I'm not being Ange anymore. And if I'm not being Ange anymore, how can the people that love me for being Ange feel comfortable around me or even be like that? And it wasn't right for me. And I think sometimes you get that feeling eventually. Like, I had a lot of questions that did I know, or did I have a gut feeling before I got married? No, I was in love with my husband.
Of course,
I married him because he was my best friend. We had a long-term relationship before we got married. This wasn't an arranged thing. Or did I feel the pressure to get married? No, I didn't. It was purely my choice, just as the divorce was also my choice.
And it's a choice for the better, because this is something you've done for yourself. Yes. And again, it's like, well done to you, because not everybody has the courage to do something like that and take a step forward like that. So you're looking after, number one, you're looking after yourself, which is good.
It is. And the thing is, I hear from a lot of, I don't have any children, but I do hear from a lot of women that are like, but I'm just in it for my children. And now I hate to say this, if you're in it for your children will realize. The older that they get, yes, the more that they see. I would have rather, and I'm going to be completely honest, I would rather, if I was a child, I'd rather have parents that are independently happy and can communicate than be together and be unhappy for the sake of it. And if I had a child, I would think of it the exact same way. If that's how I would want to feel as a child, I'd want to make sure my child feels the same way. Now, don't get me wrong, when there's kids involved, things are so much tougher when it comes to divorce. There's there's a lot more paperwork. There's a lot of different ways of going about it. But if you're talking openly and honestly, and it's a decision both partners have decided to make, then there's always a way forward. there's no, you can, like I said, you can't fill your children's cups if you're empty. You're not gonna be able to give the best of you to them if you feel empty. And like I said, I know lots of women probably listening go, but you don't know, you're not in my position. I get it, but I've been in my own position, and walking away is the hardest thing I've done. I broke as a person. I've actually been broken as a human being and had to be put back together again. And the only person that could put those pieces back together were me.
Can you talk us through the process of you putting yourself back together? Let's say, is that when you kind of start to realize about the whole mental health piece as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've had anxiety for years, and I probably didn't realize it. But a lot of people don't always understand what anxiety is. Anxiety is not something you feel every moment of every day. It depends on what spectrum you're on. For me, anxiety was things, a really silly example, but for example, when I'm at the airport and I'm looking for my passport and I can't find it, for me, my anxiety has been completely, utterly irrational, going, oh my gosh, I've lost it. I'm not gonna be able to get on a plane. Where am I gonna go? And all these thoughts happen literally in a split second. They're like, I'm gonna get kicked off the plane. I'm not gonna be able to go, blah, blah, I'm gonna be stupid. And then you find your passport because it's exactly where you've put it. That's anxiety, where you have those irrational thoughts. There's anxiety when I feel fuzzy and things. But yeah, I've always sort of just had that. But I realized that I'd lost motivation for a lot of things that I loved. And that's kind of when you realize that your mental space isn't there. I was crying. And I know it's such a cliche to be like, you're depressed, you must be crying. But it had a lot to do with, I just don't want to get out of bed. The only thing I wanted to do was just sit there and watch Netflix.
That was the trigger for when you knew that something wasn't right.
Yeah, and that was actually about a year, like I say, a few months after my separation. So it was that's when I realized. I was like, because I've actually been separated for 18 months. So obviously divorced now, but it's been a long process. And the process tears it out of you. It was a case of that every time an email comes or something comes when you have to deal with that part of that process of the divorce or anything else, you just shut your laptop because you just bury your head in the sand. And I was like, I can't keep burying my head in the sand. I'm not concentrating at work. I'm not got no motivation to be on this video call. I lost my cousin as well. You feel lost. Every day you feel lost. And the only thing you can muster is sitting around and watching TV. That was how it felt for me. And I was like, that's not me. I exercise, I train, I'm a sports person. I'm a, do you know what it is? You don't have to exercise to know that, oh, I don't feel right. But if you do all the things that come naturally to you become now unnatural, something's not right.
You were showing yourself on Instagram, or from what I could see, and I could never tell that. So it's almost like you still came across really happy. And so you made a comment there about people saying, oh, but you're really positive minded and you're always happy and you're always bubbly. But it's interesting to hear what goes on kind of behind the scenes, or what someone is actually truly feeling.
I think for me, my Instagram was also my outlet. It was a distraction, and it was a positive distraction because it was something I was doing for me. My Instagram and my page is for me. It's my creativity. It's that headspace you get into when I can shut my laptop down and be like, oh, it's the one thing I got excited about. So what I didn't want is to have that as a negative space. And it wasn't that I didn't want to share with my followers how I was feeling, is that I needed to understand and accept how I was feeling before I can share that, because that it is such a strong topic and it is such a personal topic that you have to understand it first before you can share. Because ultimately, whether you have 70,000 followers or like me, only a good 7,000 followers or a small influencer, that's still people that are paying attention, that we're hoping that you can give them advice or influence them in some way and share your story with them. You can only share your story when you understand it. And the thing is, if I'd said I'm divorced or I'm going through a separation, there'd be a million questions in my inbox. You wouldn't believe the amount of people that throughout the 18 months that I have been separated message me going, don't see a ring on your finger anymore, everything okay? And I'm like, that's rude. Or
these are random people?
Oh, random people. Yeah. Oh, absolutely random people. Or I haven't seen your husband in your Instagram, or where is he during lockdown? And like, oh gosh, the questions were relentless, and just have to.
How do you deal with that?
I ignore them. They're not relevant.
That's one way.
I mean, sometimes it wasn't even an introduction. It was just, I've noticed you don't wear your ring anymore. And I'm like, I could have just got fat fingers. Like, how do you know? Like, people just get they forget that influencers or people on Instagram are still people. We're still humans with emotions. And just because my platform for me was, I didn't want to put negativity out there in a space. I wanted it that when I've understood it, I can share that negativity onto how that has made me feel truly. But I had to understand it first, and I had to get myself help first for that. I couldn't just say I'm depressed. It's hard. And antidepressants have a stigma to them. I had my own stigma to them, and I had to deal with getting past it. I had to get off my own stigmatism horse to be like, oh yeah, that actually might be a bit of a good idea.
How did you do that? How was the process of actually overcoming all of this and kind of transitioning your mindset as well?
Oh, that took a while. That took quite a while, actually. I'd had the antidepressant. Like my doctor's very good. I explained like how I was feeling, and I was like, I just don't feel right in myself. And he was like, I think you're depressed. And so you shouldn't think, when people think someone says they're depressed 24/7, and they constantly, I know the listeners can't see my face, but they constantly just look sad.
Mm-hmm.
That's not it. My mum suffers from clinical depression. And before anyone says, no, depression is not genetics. My mum's clinically depressed, yet she is the most loving, giving, happy person you will ever meet in your life. And I had really sort of stigmatism to it, thinking, oh, you become addicted to them. People think they're happy. I used to call them happy pills. And I was like, one of my friends turned around and said, you need to stop calling them that, because that's not what they do. And when I realized that, I was like, do you know what? I'm being silly. I'm sticking that stigmatism. I'm calling them I'm happy pills, I'm popping them and I'll feel happy. That's not how it functions. And the way I was explained it, or the way I like to see, is if I cut my finger and it's bleeding, I'll put plaster on it. That's it. That's it. You're giving your body a chance to heal by putting that plaster on it. And by taking those antidepressants, what you are doing is essentially giving your mind that break to slowly deal with all those things, because what it does, it takes it from not being completely at the forefront. It just pushes it back slightly and be like, right, small bit at a time. Exactly what a plaster does. It stops the bleeding and the immediate feeling so your body can repair itself. And your mind is the same way. It's an organ. It needs time to repair. And when I got that through my head, that's when I started to accept and manage to deal with it much better and get help.
Wow. I like that about time is a healer, right? You do need time to recover, to understand, to not just get over, but actually accept what's happened, whatever that is. So, yeah.
I mean, like I said, there's grief in your divorce. People forget that. You're grieving a future that you will no longer have. You are grieving the memories you will no longer be making, or those will be your only ones. You're going to grieve that relationship, that feeling, that companionship that you had. The reason you get married is that you step into it and you think, right, I'm getting married for my dreams, to share something with someone. And essentially you're grieving the loss of all of that. There is a loss when it comes to divorce. So people, again, forget that. And grief takes time. I mean, like I said, I had to actually deal with grief and the grief from my divorce. That's a lot to take in. And when I spoke to my doctor about it, he goes, do you not realize that actually there's a lot going on? He was like, your job is intense. You work 15 hours a day supporting the NHS through a global pandemic. You're going through a divorce. You've lost your younger cousin, who is essentially like your sister. You're in lockdown. He was like, do you not think that's a lot for a human being? And I was like, possibly. I was like, I didn't realize, like, until you step back and someone says it back to you, you're a bit like, oh yeah, I hadn't considered that. And what made people also don't know is I had a health scare in the middle of all of this. There was also, there was a cancer scare in the middle of all of this, and you can't just sit there going, world, stop spinning for me, please.
My God, when it comes at you, it really comes at you.
Yeah, exactly. And like, because you sometimes don't have the time to digest all of this. When I did, that's when I realized that my mind was spinning really, really fast, and it kept spinning and it kept spinning, and I was going with it. But essentially you forget to fuel it, and the way you fuel it is through those positive, good feelings, and they weren't happening. So like eventually it's going to run out of fuel.
Wow. How did you create that positivity around you?
Takes a long time. I'm very grateful for the people around me, let's say it that way. Through the people around me, through taking time out to myself, and not feeling bad about it. So essentially, if I've gotten up and had a good day, not feeling bad about the fact that I've had a good day and that I should be feeling sad because of all these other things that are going on in my life. Like you sometimes think, well, I got up and actually I had a decent night's sleep. That's something to be, happy about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sometimes it's like I'm a very believer. It's the small things in life, and then taking that time out to remind myself of the small things in life that I still had and that was still working. So accepting it definitely helps, because then when it's accepting it, you can put things into place to deal with it. Taking the steps to actually do the actions to deal with what was happening, again, feeds in towards that positivity. And I think a lot of it had to do with remembering it's temporary. All feelings, all actions are temporary. So what I'm feeling is temporary. If I feel rubbish today, that's today, or that's this hour. Doesn't mean I have to feel like that the following day or the following hour. What can I do? It was a real push to be like, right, go outside and go for a walk. You have to go for a walk, Ange. You need to go for a walk. Forcing myself to do that. I went outside, fresh air, saw the sun was out, and suddenly you're like, oh, I'm actually, this is quite nice. Yeah. So there was lots of different things, picking up reading again, but slowing down. This is one thing I am grateful for with lockdown. Slowing down definitely helped me get back out of that negative space, without a doubt.
And you mentioned you live alone, and you transitioned from obviously a relationship through to kind of living on your own, being independent, doing your own thing again. What was that transition like?
It wasn't, I think for most people, I actually lived on my own before I got married too. So okay. I'd lived on my own, and then I moved back in with my parents as I decided to get married. So I had 18 months with them because I wanted to spend that last bit of time with them before I got married. I then moved into a joint family after that. So lived with my mother and father-in-law and my husband. So for the duration of my marriage, I lived there. So then, yeah, being on my own, I'll be honest with you, I don't mind it. I didn't find it that difficult, mainly because I've always been independent. I had my independence when I lived there too, and I have my independence now. You do start to realize what you miss at times, like small things. Like I wouldn't necessarily order a takeaway now because I'm like, it's just me and it doesn't seem much point. And plus that means ordering less food as well, which I'm a big food person.
Make great food from what I can see anyway. It's like your recipes and food look great.
But that's the other thing, like you have to find the joy in cooking for yourself. And that was the other thing. I got really lazy with my food at one point. I was a bit like, I was just cooking for myself. Like, what's the point? And I was like, actually, it's a form of self-love. Food is love. Like, I cooked for my husband, all the time, or like you cook for people, but you forget you actually should learn to cook for yourself, and then you'll enjoy cooking for other people too, because if you don't feed your body, and your soul's not going to be fed either. So there was an element of I had to go back into being much more organized. Like I do my planning on a Sunday, and that again, it helped me with that structuring side of things. When I'm structured and I'm organized, I could get my mind into that. But yeah, being on my own, it was a little bit difficult because I hadn't been used to sort of living on my own, and you kind of jump at all the weird noises that sometimes happen. But I'm not gonna lie, I genuinely enjoyed it, and I think it was necessary. It was very, very necessary. I think every person at some point in their life should live by themselves, even if it's just for a few months, because everything you do, you are doing for yourself, and you realize that you're like, well, if I'm cooking for myself. That's a good thing. I don't feel guilty for that. If I get everything you do is essentially for yourself, but you do miss when you have to lug heavy shopping up the stairs and you're a bit like, no one to help me, or something breaks and I'm quite short, I have to like get a neighbor to climb on a ladder because even on a ladder I can't reach. There is you do miss the companionship, but I'll be honest with you, I personally don't find it that difficult being on my own, because
good.
I've always I've always been independent, and people mistake being alone for being lonely. That's the other thing.
Big mistake. Big mistake. Yeah. I completely agree. So I've lived by myself as well, and I absolutely loved it. I could do my own thing, had my own routine, my own schedule. And I know what you mean by cooking for just one person. I batch cooked a little bit, but it just gave me so much independence, so much freedom. And I loved doing all these things for myself and just learning more about myself through being by myself. And never was I once lonely. Never.
So, I mean, it's hard, and now with lockdown, obviously, I do get a little bit lonely because I'm a bit like, I can't hug anybody. But that's more to do with coronavirus than anything else. Like,
yeah.
But I think also, like, when you're married, you always, and I think this comes from within me. I actually don't think this is a fault from anything else. Like, sitting down, I would feel bad. I was like, surely there must be something to do. There must be some cleaning, some cooking, something I should be doing somewhere or whatever. But here, if I decide to do the vacuuming an hour later, it ain't going to make a difference because it's just me.
You can the sink for tomorrow. That's okay.
Oh, I do, and it's really terrible. I used to have my husband off and like other people off for leaving stuff in the sink, and now I'm a bit like, shut the door, I'm gonna walk away. Because you're as conscious when you're living with other people that what you are doing will affect someone else essentially, or what you're not doing could affect someone else. And that is a lot of pressure as well. So I think people always think like living on your own is being lonely, but yeah, I didn't mind it. Like I said, there is a lot of things you do miss, and I'm not going to deny that, but I don't have a responsibility anymore, and that's quite freeing. My only responsibility is myself on a daily basis.
Which is the best kind, yourself.
That doesn't mean I don't care, and I like, more than anyone, I'm always fussed about my friends and family because they mean a lot to me. And like I said, even to an extent, my ex-husband, as long as he's healthy and happy, that's fine.
That's good. So tell me, Anjli, what's next for you?
Oh dear me. I want to get back to traveling once this pandemic's over. I think I mean, I'm a very, very keen traveler. I love traveling. I think you learn so much for traveling. And that's the other thing. You were saying what else got me past, and actually that reminds me before I forget. One of the things that I did just at the peak of when I was hitting my, I say depression, but like when it was really bad, I had to take a month off work, and I made sure I didn't feel guilty about it. And I did take a month off work because it was needed. And at this point, this was the summer. So this was like July, August time. So peak pandemic, peak everything. I was like, I'm going on holiday. I'm going to go by myself. And that's that. So I literally booked a ticket and went about a few days later and just went on holiday by myself. And that made, if I'm not saying anybody who's struggling with depression, you need to jump on a plane. That's not what I'm saying. But I did that for me. And that was amazing. It really was. And that was at the height of literally, I'd taken a month off work, and I was like, people are going to think I took a month off work sick and now I'm running away on holiday. But actually, that's not the case. I'm doing it for all the right reasons. So yeah, that was also something that helps, that you find something to do for yourself that gives you confidence back, that gives you feeling back. Like, I've always flown on my own, but I've never done full 4 or 5 days completely on my own in a hotel, eat by myself, all of that. I'm used to having dinner by myself because I travel a lot for work on one night, but not night after night after night. So this was definitely, so yeah, a lot of traveling is hopefully going to be coming my way.
Oh, I'm with you on that one. I love travel, and just to hear that you've done your own little solo travel stint in those kind of difficult times for you, and you loved it, and you learned a lot about yourself, and you just grew in that period, is so nice to hear. Because I think it takes a lot of courage to just go on your own and to do anything, let alone go abroad. So yeah, it's quite a scary concept. So the fact that you actually just thought, let me just do it during that period of your life, it's great.
The way I thought of it is, I was like, I've tackled India airports by myself and Hong Kong and Chinese airports by myself, because my husband used to work abroad a lot. So I used to fly out a lot to sort of like meet him. So all the flights and getting through like those, and I was like, if I can do that, I can handle a few days in costs by myself. Hired a car and drove around the whole island by my ones. And I was like, again, like, I think if you are feeling, one thing I'd always say, if you are feeling like you are not being yourself, just because you get told you're depressed, that doesn't mean you're going to be depressed for the rest of your life. Accept that it's a feeling, and what can you do to make it yourself better? And for everybody, that's going to be different. But try those things. But it takes a lot of pushing, and it has to come from within you. No one else can push you. No one else can push me out that door. If they did, I'd probably be like, I want to hide in a corner. You have got to push yourself out, and that's the hardest bit. getting up and like one day I remember I was just proud of the fact that I got up and brushed my hair. I was like, I brushed my hair, and do you know, I hadn't brushed my hair for like 2-3 years because I didn't feel like it, and I didn't want to, and I was like, right, that's my achievement of the day. I brushed my hair. So for me, I think just next will be just a lot of travel, and then hopefully being able to share my journey. And I mean, like I said, shared that and picking up more on the taboo things and stigmatism that people talk about, and hopefully able to share advice and experience with other people. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to do a lot more of, and the journey of finding myself a little bit more and being a lot more peaceful. Like I do feel a lot more at peace and a lot happier.
That's good. I'm really glad that your next steps are also kind of sharing your stories and experiences with others, because I find women will really benefit from that, just like the ones listening to this. They'll be able to find a kind of common link or a connection. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story and coming on this podcast. I know it's been a difficult kind of journey and something that you've just openly shared with me. So thank you.
No, it's been great. And like I said, if anybody ever feels it, you know, please do reach out, whether it's you reach out to the person already sharing the story like myself, or if it's a friend, or even if it's just your doctor. You know, I went to counselling, and sharing it with a strange person again helps. Counselling isn't you just letting things off your chest, it's realization, it's giving yourself a break. Those are steps for yourself, and there is a way to do having an amicable divorce. It doesn't always have to turn nasty and awful. So be honest and true to yourself as to what you need. Listen to your gut. That's what I'd say. Listen to your gut, because what your heart and your gut are saying is normally right.
Thank you so much for listening to the Fearless Females Voice podcast. Be sure to join our Facebook group called Fearless Females and stay tuned for the next episode. Bye for now.